Hi and welcome to the WeightChoice program where we're getting real results for real people. I'm Christine Sutherland, the founder of the WeightChoice method, and the reason that I began this journey some 15 years ago was because it became very evident to me that almost 100% of people were failed by existing weight loss programs, and the same goes for today. Over 15 years ago, when I devised this method, I wrote a book called Beat Cravings, Shift Fat. It was published internationally by McGraw-Hill, translated into a number of languages. And McGraw-Hill published this book despite the advice of some of their top executives. They were advised that the book would bomb because it was not a diet, it was not a pill, it was not a shake. It was none of those magic bullets that people were looking for at the time. And, they were absolutely right. My book bombed all over the world. But much to my delight, times have changed. And people now realise that those old weight loss methods don't work. Goodness knows they've tried them enough times. And they realise that once they finish their diet program or their exercise program, nothing has really changed. So of course, against their will even, they revert to the way that they used to be before the diet or before the exercise program. And in fact, they end up putting on even more weight because generally they've reduced their metabolic rate. And we now know that dieters actually add an extra 6 pounds per annum over and above the general population. So I'm delighted that the world is now ready for this method, and I believe it will go very viral very fast. So let's begin. The WeightChoice program has been designed as an 8-week program, but of course some people will need or want to take much longer, and that's perfectly fine. It's okay to dive in and just have a look around. It's okay to do 1 week and then take a break and come back when you're ready. It's a program that you do at your own pace because it's not a race and it really is about permanent change. So in week 1, we look at non-hungry reasons for eating. We introduce the concept of conditioning or conditioned responses, and also teach you the first of our techniques to actually eliminate those conditioned responses so that they no longer occur. In week 2, we look at emotional reasons or links to eating, and we teach you a technique to permanently eliminate the link between emotions and eating so that when you feel a certain way, you no longer feel an urge to eat in a certain way. In week 3, we look at habitual eating, and we show you how to very permanently and very quickly and easily eliminate any link between certain activities or certain situations that have become linked to eating. In week 4, we show you how to quickly and permanently and easily eliminate negative associations with movement or exercise or playtime using Dr. Larry Philip Nim's Be Set Free Fast technique. In week 5, we use that as a catch-up troubleshooting week to really refine your mastery of the techniques, answer your questions, and just simply do much more practice. So it's quite a deep week. In week 6, we look at your identity or your self-view as a factor in weight. And now we're not talking about necessarily your conscious view of yourself, but what's actually going on in your subconscious mind or in your unconscious. And we show you how to permanently modify that self-view so that you really do see and feel yourself as a naturally slim and healthy person. This is part of the key of never ever having to diet again or think about food ever again, so that you can go on with your life eating, drinking, living exactly the way you want, but you are no longer a person who is capable of holding on to excess weight. In week 7, we examine types of criticism or negativity that you might be exposed to because of the changes that you're making. And we teach really simple techniques to empower you and to deflect that criticism without damaging those important relationships around you. In week 8, with all of your eating and activity issues solved, we really dive into what normal eating really is. And we give you a planning and shopping method that is proven to cut the food bill and your shopping time by up to 75%. That is a real surprise. So the agenda for this first lesson is we go over the ground rules which relate to getting the most out of the group. We look at food diaries and questionnaires. We examine exactly why traditional weight loss programs have failed you. We look at non-hungry reasons for eating. We explain what conditioned responses actually are. We teach the kill cravings technique to eliminate that. And we give you a slimming task for the next week ahead. Finally, we ask for your feedback in the support groups. So the group rules basically, and firstly, is confidentiality. So although we have public and private forums to support our people all the way through, not only through the program but after the program, keep in mind that everything that's said there is confidential. So it would be very wrong to take things that are said there outside of those forums. Please respect other people's confidentiality as you expect yours to be respected as well. Be supportive, be positive. People can feel unhappy or can feel distressed. At times, you may even think that, oh, you're not really making much progress. So rather than saying, oh, this isn't working for me or this is rubbish, please come on in and have a talk with us about that. We're very, very happy to give you every bit of help that we possibly can to make this work for you. And work is actually a key factor. So your expectations would be quite seriously out of whack if you thought that this was something that we were going to do to you, because it isn't. You're actually going to do the work. So our job is to share with you these amazingly powerful and easy techniques that really do create permanent, easy change. Your job is to actually apply the techniques, practice the techniques, and master the techniques, asking for our support whenever necessary. Your expectations would also be quite out of whack if you expected to lose, say, 10 kilos in a week. Obviously, that's not going to happen, not with healthy fat loss. The only way that people can lose large amounts of weight each week is if they're losing water weight or muscle weight, because muscles are quite dense. So if you're losing more than, say, 500 grams to a kilo a week, the laws of physics apply, and that's all. If you're losing more than that, you're losing not just fat, but you're losing all important water, hydration, fluid, and probably losing muscle mass, and probably lowering your metabolic rate, meaning that you create more fat. So please watch your weight loss and aim not to lose more than 500 grams to 1 kilo, because then you can be certain that all you're losing is fat and you're not damaging yourself in the meantime. Another thing that people sometimes say is, oh yes, this is just like such and such. Oh yes, I've seen this before. Trust me, there is very little of this that you would have seen. You may have come across things that look similar, but dig deeper and you'll see that this is well and truly in advance of anything you would have seen before. So rather than saying, oh, this is similar to what I've seen, please ask yourself, how is this different from what I've seen? And then you'll become more aware of those subtleties that make the difference. Finally, please do not think that none of this applies to you because you're a very conscientious, very disciplined person and you always make the most of every single training you ever go to. You know, I'm like that too. But one of the things that unites us all as human beings is that pretty much all of this applies to us pretty much all of the time. It's in our nature. So the trick is to catch ourselves doing it, give ourselves a little shake and get back on board with what we need to do. And if we need help, ask for it. That's what we're here for. So people have tried all kinds of diets, all kinds of exercise programs in order to lose weight, and sometimes they've lost that weight, but inevitably the weight comes back on. And in fact, no matter what program you've tried, our own government health statistics tell us that less than 3% of people ever manage to maintain a healthy weight. Sooner or later it comes back. And it comes back even faster and even more so than ever before. So we're going to ask you to ditch all of this. So why do these diets fail? Why do these programs fail? Because what they ask you to do is not what you naturally prefer. Your ingrained, programmed preferences and compulsions and habits are what rules you, and that's run by our unconscious mind. So unless the program actually alters what's going on in our unconscious mind, nothing changes, and sooner or later we will revert to form, even against our will. The typical diet goes like this. We call it the diet merry-go-round, and it generally starts not because somebody wants to be more healthy or fitter. It generally kicks off because we're not happy with how we look. We feel that we're unattractive. We think we're unattractive. We maybe look in the mirror and the clothes are too tight, or we just don't look nice in them, or maybe, that pair of pants just won't do up anymore. So we decide to do something about it, and that something has generally been go on a diet, which means immediately living by a set of diet rules. No matter how healthy those rules are, they are not your rules, they are the diet rules. And you always end up denying yourself either the quantity that you want or the types of food that deep down you enjoy the most. Sooner or later, we move on to part 2 over here, which is where we begin to feel deprived. Because we are deprived. We're deprived from the emotional input that we get from our preferred foods. We're physically deprived and we become frustrated. Sooner or later, we come here to anger. There are a lot of angry dieters out there, people who are trying desperately hard to stick to the diet rules and feeling more and more upset by that and angry with themselves that it's not easy, that it takes such discipline, such willpower, and that they're doing without while everybody else around them just has what they want when they want. So finally we bust out of that. We rebel with a kind of damn it, to hell with it. And we've got a lot of negative self-talk going on there. And as we bust out, we don't just start by having, say, one chocolate biscuit. We'll eat the whole darn packet. We are out of control at that point. We feel guilty and we feel ashamed, and often the eating is done in secret, behind the pantry door, going back to the fridge when no one is looking. We are upset with ourselves, we feel ashamed, and what do we do when we feel badly? We comfort eat. So we want to ease our stress and our fear and our anger, our upset, and we eat for comfort until we get back in front of that mirror and once again the pants won't do up, or we don't look so great in that dress anymore, and the whole cycle begins again. So this is the diet merry-go-round, or the exercise program merry-go-round that most people have been on at some time, and which you may be even on right now. We ask you to please step away from the merry-go-round. And incidentally, did you know that exercise only forms about 20% of maintaining a healthy weight? It's actually very, very minor. And in fact, there's some research that actually shows that where middle-aged women exercise, their appetite increases, and so they're more likely to eat more. So exercise is terribly important, but it should be fun. It should be playtime. You do it because you absolutely love it. And the benefits are health benefits, not weight benefits. So exercise, you'll live longer, you'll feel better, you'll be healthier, you'll have far less health risks, various things, immune disorders, diabetes, cancers, and also heart or respiratory diseases. Having a little bit of exercise each day, even if it's only 30 minutes or so of walking around, will absolutely minimise those risks. So exercise is essential, but not really for weight loss. So why do we eat even when we're not hungry? Sometimes it's an emotional reason. We might eat because we're happy and celebrating, or because we're sad or lonely or angry, or because we're bored, there's nothing much going on, or we've got a job to do at work but it's a bit tedious and we go reaching for the food as a kind of a distraction to help us through it. Or maybe we eat because we're tired. We might eat out of habit. It might be that a certain time of day we look up at the clock and we think, muffin, or wine o'clock time. Or it could be that the habit is we cannot have a plate that is anything other than empty. Maybe we were told so often as kids, starving kids in Africa routine from mum or dad, that now if we don't finish our plate, we feel guilty, like somehow that's wrong, that the plate has to be finished. So that's a habit. It could be mindless eating, which is kind of like a habit as well. So it could be we're in front of TV or reading or working, and somehow we've become accustomed to linking that with eating or snacking. It could be we eat for a reward, which is kind of like emotional eating. Could be we've had a big day, we've been looking after the kids, we've done a lot, we're feeling a bit exhausted, and we feel like, oh, darn it, let's have a packet of chips, or let's open those nuts, or whatever. It could be acceptance or social. We eat because other people are eating and we'd feel odd if we didn't. So that's a feeling. It could be simply because it's there. Some people, when there's a certain type of food in their pantry or in their fridge, they just have to keep going back until it's gone. And they get this feeling that somehow it'll be all okay when it's gone. So they'll just keep going back and going back, almost as if the food is calling their name. So all of these non-hungry reasons for eating that so many people do, and almost all overweight or obese people do, we're going to give you the permanent, easy, comprehensive answer to each of those, not by willpower, not by self-discipline. We're not interested in those things. We're going to change the way that your unconscious mind processes things, so this stuff just doesn't come up for you anymore, so you're absolutely free of it. So a lot of things in our life happen without our conscious choice. A lot of things are driven by our unconscious mind. So excuse me for anyone who is kind of frightened of this kind of thing. If you've got any phobias, don't look at this and I'll let you know when it's safe. But here it is. So if you're looking at this, do you go, oh, how cute, how sweet, I just can't wait to give him a little pat? Did you think that? I didn't. So do you think that if a baby saw this, the baby would react like you did? What do you think a baby would do if it saw this spider? It would probably want to have a chew on it, pick it up and have a chew on it. So the baby has no reaction to that spider other than curiosity and wondering what it tastes like. For you or for anyone to have any kind of other reaction to this spider, that's something that you've had to learn unconsciously. You didn't look at the spider and think, oh yeah, spider, hairy, yeah, I'd better get some feelings up about dislike or fear or whatever. You didn't have to do that consciously because your unconscious mind did it for you. And there are many, many other things in life that are exactly like this. So how does that unconscious processing get into your brain in the first place? How does that unconscious program make things happen in your body and cause you to react or behave in certain ways? So our knowledge of this goes back well over 100 years to a guy called Pavlov, whom you've probably heard of, because Pavlov did experiments with dogs. And it was experiments not about conditioning, really. He started experimenting with dogs because he was interested in measuring their salivation rates. So Pavlov would give the dog food and the dog would salivate, obviously. If he rang a bell, then that's not food. The dog wouldn't initially salivate at the sound of the bell. And I know this diagram has a bell and most people talk about Pavlov and his bells, but in fact it was a tuning tine just for accuracy's sake. Now, what Pavlov noticed is that when he served up the food and rang the tuning tine at the same time, the dog would drool because the food is included in that. Now, if he did that a number of times, it would get to the point where without serving the food, if Pavlov simply rang the tuning tine, the dog would drool. The dog now had a conditioned response to the tuning tine. And this is very similar to what happens for human beings. And in fact, Pavlov reckoned that almost everything we human beings do is conditioned rather than as a result of free will. And this comes right down even to the way we think about ourselves, who we are, how we are in the world, what we deserve, what we don't deserve, all of our habits, all of our preferences, all of our beliefs and all of our values are in fact conditioned responses. Now, the really interesting thing is Pavlov could certainly install these conditioned responses in the animals. But he did something that was even more important, and if only he had realized at the time, or if anybody had realized what he was doing at the time, it would have changed the course of human history over the last 100 years. Can you imagine that? So what Pavlov did is, apart from the tuning tine, he also used electric shocks linked with food so that the dog would salivate when given an electric shock. Pavlov was very interested to know just how far away from the original shock site he could give another shock before the dog would fail to salivate. So as he experimented, he found that as he moved further away from the original shock site, the dog no longer salivated. So the conditioned response failed at that point. And you might think, well, of course it failed because it was nowhere near where he set it up in the first place. However, here's the interesting thing, and here's the whole point. When he went back to the original shock site, the dog no longer salivated. He had unknowingly and without realizing the significance eliminated very rapidly a conditioned response. And that's exactly what we'll be doing, but without electric shocks, you'll be pleased to know. So let's look at some of the science behind this. In our brains, we have a region called the thalamus just here. And the thalamus is very interesting because it's kind of like a gatekeeper. So all of the sensory information that we become aware of, which is things that we see in the outside world or smell or taste or touch, all of those, that data, that information enters the thalamus first. And not only does that information enter the thalamus first, but even if we imagine that sensory information, it goes to the thalamus first. From the thalamus, it moves to the amygdala region and hippocampus, and those two are responsible for the formation of conditioned responses. From there, the information goes to the hypothalamus and then to the pituitary gland, which unleashes a cascade of hormones throughout our system, which drive our feelings, our urges, and our behaviours. So this is how conditioned responses actually form and are activated in the brain. They are not stored in the brain. So there's nowhere in the brain where you can point and say, that's my preference for potato chips, or that's my preference for creamy pasta, or that's my preference for lying on the couch instead of going and taking a walk around my garden. What has to happen is that conditioned response that you have, rather than being stored, actually has to be recreated every single time on the basis of some trigger or stimulus. So it has to be recreated, or as researchers call it, reformulated every time. Now, it used to be thought that conditioned responses were very robust, very tough to get rid of, and there have been some particularly brutal and unkind psychological techniques that have been devised to kind of attack these conditioned responses with an atom bomb, which have nevertheless failed because they haven't understood their nature. What we know is that conditioned responses are not robust, are not strong at all. They're incredibly fragile if only we know how to treat them. If we interrupt the reformulation of a conditioned response, we basically kill it. We eliminate it. Psychologists say that we extinguish it, or that the response is now extinct. So we trigger the conditioned response, we deliberately stimulate it by maybe thinking about a particular food, for example, and we interrupt that with some other stimulation. By interrupting it, we eliminate it forever. And that may sound impossible, but we're going to prove it to you in this first lesson. So here's a picture that we call chocolate brain. So here the information is seen by the eyes and transmitted through to the thalamus. So it's visual data, and it might also be smell as well. I can't think of the word at the moment, or gustatory for taste, but that information goes through to the thalamus first, then to the amygdala, and we know that the sequence from there automatically creates a cascade of hormones that control our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts, and our actions. So knowing this, why can't we just stop it? Why can't we just stop and say, no, that's just a conditioned response, I don't need to do that? Problem is, there is a massive big gap in power between the unconscious mind and the conscious mind. Libet says that the unconscious mind can process around 2 million bits of information every single second, whereas our conscious thinking aware mind can process only 7. How can we possibly compete with that? We're overloaded with information. And in fact, going back to this slide, all the action is happening in here. This is the unconscious part. Our thinking part is up here, where I'm pointing with the cursor. What happens when we get this kind of information and we've got this automatic stuff going on in the unconscious is that it actually tends to shut down the thinking part. So you might be aware of being lost for words, for example, at this point, maybe a bit trance-like even, because this has taken over and this is what is driving you, because you've got 2 million versus 7. There's also a very big gap when it comes to the speed of the unconscious mind versus the conscious mind. So let's say there's a stimulus, which might be, I'm going to use chocolate again because I know, you may not like chocolate, but an awful lot of people do and even have an addiction to it. So let's say we're presented with a box of chocolates. 0.02 seconds after that, we actually have that emotional response. The hormones are flooding and they are driving our actions. Our arm is reaching out, our hand is ready, poised. We've got the chocolate in our fingers, and we only realize that consciously a half a second later, and our first conscious thought may be, I really shouldn't be having this. But it's all over, the horses have bolted. So in traditional psychology, what's happened is that all of the attention has been here. Whether that's been cognitive behavior therapy, my pet hate, or whether it's been the new mindfulness techniques or acceptance and commitment therapy, it's all working with the person here when the horse has already bolted. This to me is absolutely crazy because the change needs to happen right here. At the level of the conditioned response, this is what we need to extinguish. When we extinguish this conditioned response, we have different thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and our conscious thoughts automatically change. How could they possibly stay the same? Can you see the sense in this? So the golden rules of extinction, getting rid of these conditioned responses. And please keep in mind, you are not your conditioned responses. Those are things that, they're like little blips in the brain. They're things that you've accidentally learned unconsciously that you had no intention of learning. They're accidents. So you are not them. Conditioned responses are not set in cement. They are incredibly fragile, and provided you have the correct technique, can be very quickly and easily and safely extinguished. All you need to do is interrupt their reformulation, and if you do that accurately enough, they will not come back. Now, I am not the only person to make this claim. Countless researchers are heading in this direction right now. This is just a few of them. There are hundreds and hundreds. Way back in 2001, I was doing research, which is black box research really, which was applying a technique to try to eliminate a conditioned response. It was very successful. One of my studies was peer-reviewed and published in a US academic journal, but I didn't have the resources to actually measure what was going on in the brain. These people obviously do, and their research absolutely backs up what I've been saying for the last 15 years, and I am more than excited to see this brilliant research, this cutting-edge research going on right now, proving that if we interrupt a reformulation of a conditioned response, we will eliminate it. So the kill cravings technique we're going to explain separately in the following videos, but basically we're going to deliberately trigger a set of sensory information about an actual food, and we're going to condition that to a touch on one knee. We're going to trigger a strong sense of revulsion about something else and associate that with a touch on your other knee. And we're then going to collapse those together. We're going to actually touch both knees in sequence so that we're really putting those two conditioned responses together. We are interrupting the reformulation of that food response, and that will eliminate that response to that food, so that instead of treating that food like an overweight person, you'll treat that food like a slim and healthy person. So you're going to get a slimming task for the week. We're going to tell you where to get that support, and we want you to come in on a daily basis and lean on us heavily and give us feedback, debrief what you're doing, just allow us to give you all of the help that we possibly can. So thank you for listening, and let's move on with Kill Cravings.